Um, so yes, following on from what Arvid was just saying, yes, absolutely, I agree. Let your trainees explore different things outside of work, develop their skills and knowledge, and that's sort of what my talk will be about today as well. Although the title isn't perhaps particularly clear, but hopefully it will become clearer as it goes on. But before I do start, I'll just sort of introduce myself. My name's Alex. I am the Students and New Professionals Officer. I joined a couple of months ago, so I'm quite new. Being the Students and New Professionals Officer, I also happen to be a student and a new professional. I'm studying my MA in Library and Information Services Management at Sheffield, and I've been doing that distance learning part-time. And concurrently, I've been working as a library trainee for the Institute of Historical Research. So I started both those roles in September last year. So it was at a time of slight optimism when things seemed like COVID might end, and then very quickly it realized that was not the case, and we were plunged back into complete lockdown measures. So it wasn't a typical graduate trainee experience, and it still hasn't been. When obviously we've got people in the reading rooms now, people can make bookings and things are starting to resemble normality somewhat. But for the first few months of my traineeship, that certainly wasn't the case. And there was a slight concern that there were many aspects of my traineeship that I wouldn't be able to do. For example, a large portion of it historically had been working with conservators, working with rare materials and understanding paper conservation, preservation techniques. None of that was possible because the conservators couldn't even come on site. We couldn't come on site. And there was very little that could be taught or learned when you didn't have the physical materials in front of you. So this talk really is about what happened or what I did when there wasn't anything else to do, when there weren't readers in the reading rooms, and when I was, as was often the case, I was in the library pretty much on my own, with looking for work to do. And there was plenty of work to do. I think most librarians who've been working on the site the last year will say they haven't been sitting around twiddling their thumbs. It's been incredibly busy. In fact, actually perhaps busier, obviously offering remote services to users and things like that. But this one bit of particular housekeeping sort of became a project that's dominated the last 10 months of my life and is almost reaching completion now, as my traineeship does as well. And I'm sort of battling against time to actually finish it when I finish. But yes, so this talk I've called Scandinavian Surplus, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Lockdown. Scandinavian Surplus comes from this note that I found when I was up in the tower of Senate House Libraries. So this was on the 17th floor of the tower. So if you walk by Russell Square, you'll see this horrible Orwellian, or beautiful Orwellian Art Deco building towering over the whole of Bloomsbury. And I spend a worrying amount of time wandering between the stacks up there. And this is where I found Scandinavian Surplus, which in reality was lots and lots and lots of books, which were disorganized, they were unlabeled, they were partially catalogued, though the cataloguing was done at, most of it was done at some point in the early 90s. It was completely inaccessible. As you can see, there are some books here which you'd have to take several books off of them to get to. And also the fact that only staff could even get to this floor in the first place. The public don't have access to these shelves at all. There's concerns about conservation. This picture here shows you some of the more modern monographs, but there were items there which have since been put into rare books special collections, but for a long time were just on the floor, basically. And there was only very basic classification as well. So although these things were actually on our online catalogue, you'd have a tough time trying to find what you needed. So for example, this pile of books here had been classified. And it's hard to see, I think, with this image, but the piece of paper underneath the 4 books has written on it in handwriting ED4, which means Sweden, of course. So at the start of this project, there were approximately 500 volumes which were under the class mark ED4, and they were distributed in various corners of the 17th floor in the Senate House Tower. So in short, if you were researching Swedish history, this is what you'd be met with. You'd have a tough time trying to find anything specific. And even these books here, I mean, they're not even stood up the right way. So this is the kind of situation we're dealing with. But anyway, we confronted this, and I spoke to my colleagues who said that they were fully aware of the Scandinavian collection, which was largely accumulated in one big go in the 90s. And then no one really got round to doing anything substantial with it. And there weren't many people asking to use it either. There are other places that have Scandinavian collections and Nordic collections. Edinburgh have an excellent collection. Of course, UCL also have a really, really good collection. But there's a lot of items in this collection at the IHR which aren't replicated there. In fact, there are some that aren't replicated anywhere outside of their countries of origin. So there was certainly a need to classify and catalogue these items correctly to make them accessible. But it's just something that no one got round to. It was never a priority, and it's a very small team at the IHR anyway. So it was always on the back burner. But we decided this year, as there were fewer responsibilities for me to deal with as trainee in regards to readers' inquiries, that instead I could focus a portion of my time on this project, which I did. So this is it now, or at least a portion of it now. And just the picture I find very, very pleasing. But it's all been reclassified under a new in-house system, which is based on a system that was designed for our other British European collections, with some variation obviously for the subject. But the classification designates geography, then chronology, subject, and finally author in the final cutter. So this way we can break up the full Scandinavian, or as it's now actually known, Nordic collections into general works, then Danish works, Norwegian works, Swedish works, Icelandic works, and we're hoping to integrate Finnish works into there as well. And then breaking them down into significant time periods. So we have everything spanning from early medieval to contemporary subject matters, and then finally also cutters for authors to make it easier to navigate. Also, catalogue entries, which did exist for the most part in a very rudimentary form, have now all been updated to RDA standards. Also, there were quite a few errors, as a lot of the catalogue records were brought over sort of wholesale. So those, I've been able to go through all of them and unpick them and fix them. And while they're not all perhaps as descriptive as I'd like, as it was quite a large undertaking, but they're certainly at a place now where they're totally discoverable. You know exactly what you're getting into when you get it, and even some of them have 504 entries for contents and things like that. So it's a much better state than it was before, and it was all up to RDA standard as well. And of course, they've been labelled, as you can see there, and reshelved. They aren't on the open shelves yet, but they are reshelved on the 17th floor store. And there's the hope that if we have enough Scandinavian historians or Nordic historians visiting in future, that these items will eventually then migrate downwards into the reading rooms. So this is where we are right now. This was actually the space I was originally designated, but it since has spilled over to shelves that you can't see beyond these stacks. But this is how far we've got, and it's almost done. But there are next steps which I won't be able to undertake, but hopefully a future trainee will be able to. We would like to integrate periodicals and also Finnish collections into this Nordic collections as a whole. And there is scope for that within the classification system. We also are working to create a detailed subject guide. So sort of one-stop shop for someone to get an introduction to what exactly is here in terms of content. We have a lot of works of correspondence, for example, of Danish nobility and kings. And these are fairly unique and complete collections as well. We're talking 26 volume collections, which can't be found anywhere outside of Denmark. So these are the sorts of things that we really want to promote through a subject guide, which I'm at the moment working on, hopefully will be done by the end of next month, fingers crossed. We also want to continue acquisitions to improve our holdings. Again, we are continuously acquiring material for all of our collections. But the Scandinavian collections, there's always been a hesitation there because obviously we don't quite know what we've got. But now that we do, there's a sense of confidence that we can start buying new monographs and new publications to supplement our existing collection of Nordic works. And yeah, finally there, just to identify and promote our unique items. Like I said, though not visible here, I don't think, maybe one or two, but although not visible here, there were some items that were taken out and put into special collections as well, just because they were particularly old, fragile, rare, or unique to the UK. So those are things that we really want to push as being research resources that can't be found anywhere else in the UK. So there's a little picture here as well, just from the Icelandic section. The Icelandic section, actually, although it's the smallest, it is my favourite. It's a lovely mixture of sagas, both in the original text, but also edited, translated, with literary criticisms, but also historical context, which altogether is a really interesting resource, actually, for someone who's studying the sagas, be it as from a literary perspective or from a historical perspective. But then we also have a lot of interesting items that were written by visitors to Iceland in the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries. I'm somewhat of a fanatic about William Morris, and his journals, Icelandic journals, do feature in this collection. But those more recent 18th, 19th, 20th century records of often British or American visitors going to Iceland, I think, are really interesting resources. But generally, so the lessons learned from this project: firstly, don't wait a quarter of a century before properly organising your collection, or else you're going to have to wait for some pandemic basically to happen before anyone's going to get around to it. Accurate and detailed catalogue records are important. Who knew? But yeah, cataloguing matters a lot, and that's what I've really taken away from my traineeship as well. It's not really very sexy to talk about metadata. Everyone talks about digitizing works, but no one wants to talk about creating the metadata for them, and we need to. And obviously there's a lot of people who are very serious about metadata, but I think sometimes it can fall by the wayside, as was the case here. So it's always important to consider, especially with the rapid development of RDA and movement into 3R, which is something that we can't even implement, but that's reason enough, I think, to really keep a finger on the pulse of metadata. And finally, a lesson learned is that a lot of Danish historical research was funded by the Carlsberg Brewery, and you will see that in the imprint of about a third of our 19th and early 20th century Danish resources. So yeah, that's my talk. That's what I've been up to for the last year. Thank you very much for your time, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, my handle is there. Yeah, thanks.
Right, Alex, thank you. A classic library story, really. I already have my first question for you as well, actually, if you're ready.
Oh yeah.
Because you talked you started your cutters with geography. What geography were you using? Obviously, that's a bit of a choice, right? Are you using modern geography and then start from there? And obviously, borders have changed up there as well.
Yeah, that was a nightmare. So yeah, you're right. The geography has changed a lot. This is a large reason why the Finnish collections have been left to last, because the reason we went with geography is because, like I said, the in-house system in general uses geographical designation, and it's just historically has before I was there. But we use contemporary geography, and that often has proved to be the easiest, although it like you said, yeah, obviously things have changed a lot, especially
and it might still change in the future, you never know, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And actually, I was looking at those because we have specifically there is a part of the classification system allows for regional history, and there are regions in, I think it's Norway or Sweden, which changed in 2017. So I was looking at these more recent items and saying, well, this was once in this region, but now it's in this region. Whose local history is this? And that's a very good question, which I think that, yeah, I think we've done our best to try and accommodate those historical differences. But yeah, largely we use modern geography as a kickoff point. And if there are, like the 2017 changes in regions where the border will change ever so slightly and suddenly two people are contesting their own local history, things like that, we will put in the catalogue record to account for that. So although maybe the classification will belong to one region, but actually the catalogue is representative of the historical differences in geography and borders.
Thank you very much.